On Tuesday, the 2nd of April, just last month, a 25-year-old woman named Morgan Farley was spending the morning preparing some breakfast as her father Sam walked out the door for work. However, when he returned home later that day, the very same food was still on the kitchen counter and Morgan was nowhere to be seen. So, concerned for his daughter's safety, the following day Sam Farley headed over to the local Chicago police station to fill out a missing person report and asked the on-duty officers if they could conduct an investigation into her disappearance. But to his surprise, the police immediately denied Sam's request and instead handed him a business card before sending him on his way. So, with nowhere else to turn, Morgan's family would come together to search for the missing young woman, even reaching out to local journalists who attempted to spread the story. And eventually, the police would finally agree to share the missing person report on their website. However, after 5 weeks of searching, the 25-year-old still remains a missing person to this day, leaving her family understandably desperate for answers as they wonder, what really happened to Morgan Farley, and who could be behind her strange disappearance? Morgan Farley was born in the late 90s to her loving mother and devoted father, Sam Farley, in the city of Chicago, where she grew up alongside her older sister, Whitney. Not too much is known about her childhood, however what we do know is that at the age of just 8 years old, Morgan would unfortunately suffer a heartbreaking loss within the family, when her mother passed away in 2007. And by all accounts, this loss would go on to cause a great deal of grief for Morgan, eventually leading to some mental health issues in her teenage years. But this wasn't the only impact of the tragedy, as it also seemed to affect the relationship she shared with her father Sam, who was also immensely struggling with the news and would find himself leaning heavily on his own parents for support, with Sam and Morgan attempting to maintain a strong father-daughter relationship despite the situation. So, doing the best he could, Sam was able to raise Morgan to be an incredibly caring person who loved her family and would be there for anybody if they needed her. And so, it was likely due to these close-knit relationships that she was able to thrive in education, eventually graduating from Hyde Park Academy High School with a relatively positive outlook for her future. Morgan would then go on to date a few different people in her teenage years and early 20s, eventually deciding to move out of the family home to live with her partner at the time. But during this period, it would seem that a pattern had started to emerge within these romantic relationships, where she would be constantly mistreated and find herself in unhealthy situations that would inevitably end in tears. So, it was no surprise that in the year 2022, she would find herself moving back in with her father at the age of 24, with the hope of starting fresh once again. However, during this very same year, Morgan would unfortunately suffer yet another family loss, when her grandparents would both pass away on the very same day, bringing back those familiar feelings of grief from her childhood, alongside a debilitating depression that would appear to plague her life moving forward. In the following year, Morgan would also experience her first known mental health crisis, for which her father Sam was given no choice but to commit her to a psychiatric hospital where she would be officially diagnosed with depression and was given medication to help her deal with the disease. According to her father, after this event it had been difficult for him to hold back from providing any parental advice to his now adult daughter, so he decided to follow in his own mother's footsteps and started writing Morgan letters, which shared his love and offered unwavering support. And according to family members, it appeared that these attempts would begin to work, as Morgan was starting to make progress in managing her depression and was in good spirits for the first time in a long time. However, despite the clear progress she had been making, everything would suddenly change on that fateful day in April, when Morgan Farley would mysteriously disappear without a trace. On Tuesday the 2nd of April, the 25-year-old woman was spending the morning preparing breakfast as she did most days, deciding to sport a brown wig, light blue jeans and gym shoes while she diced a potato on the kitchen counter. And then at around 7 AM she would hear the sound of her father leaving for work, but for whatever reason the two didn't exchange any words, with Morgan deciding to simply continue on with her food preparation rather than acknowledging his departure. However, It would seem that after closing the door and heading for work, an event would take place that still confuses the family to this day, as shortly after, Morgan would decide to drop the food she was preparing and head out the door herself, for reasons which are still completely unknown. According to reports, a woman matching her description was then seen walking down the street of her Chicago home on the 1300 block of West 110th Street, but it is unknown which direction she was heading or if in fact this person even was her. So, when Sam Farley returned home after work, you can imagine the panic that immediately set in his mind, as he would enter the kitchen to see the very same potato that Morgan was dicing earlier that morning, oxidized and brown, confirming that it had been left out for the entire day. But attempting to stay positive, he didn't let this discovery cause too much grief, as Morgan was an adult woman who was free to make her own choices. So rather than reporting the incident right away, he instead decided to reach out to Morgan first, in the hopes that she would be able to confirm her safety. However, this mild concern would soon evolve into a much deeper sense of dread, as Sam would wake up the next morning to learn something that would break his heart. On Wednesday the 3rd of April, Sam Farley would wake to see that his daughter had not responded to a single message or phone call since her strange disappearance the day before. So concerned that she may have been in danger given her past mental health issues, he immediately rushed over to the local Chicago police station to officially report her as missing. Once he arrived, Sam went on to explain how Morgan had recently suffered a mental health crisis and was diagnosed with depression. So the fact that she was missing was an incredibly serious concern and she needed to be found right away to prevent the worst from happening. However, despite his pleas for help, the police simply handed Sam a business card, explaining that as Morgan was a 25-year-old woman who left on her own accord, there was no reason to raise the alarm bells just yet. So instead, Sam was told to fill out a generic questionnaire with the details of the disappearance before being sent on his way. So, feeling discouraged, Sam quickly realized that he needed to take the case into his own hands, as the police didn't seem to be too interested in helping find his missing daughter. So with nowhere else to turn, he went on to make some very difficult phone calls to let the wider family know that Morgan had disappeared, and how he needed help in locating her. Morgan's half-sister Whitney Wade would then step up to the plate, as she was a program officer for a Chicago-based women's foundation, and therefore had some very useful connections that would have likely aided in the search. So, as soon as she was able to gather her thoughts, Whitney posted a photograph of Morgan with a descriptive caption, letting her social media communities know that her sister was missing and endangered. But to her surprise, it wouldn't be long at all before the story would start to gather some momentum. On Monday the 8th of April, the word of Morgan's disappearance was spread across the local community, with friends of Whitney also pledging to do their part in the search. And later that day, a local journalist named Sylvia Snowden, who grew up with Whitney, would repost her friend's appeal to her thousands of followers. According to Sylvia, she was immediately moved by the story and wanted to do whatever she could to help. So after hitting the share button, a good friend of Morgan's named Kelsey Riley would also stumble upon the post, and by all accounts, her heart would sink into the pit of her stomach. Hours later, a group chat was created, and a search team was established consisting of Whitney Wade, Sylvia Snowden, and Kelsey Riley, who were all determined to do everything they could to find Morgan before it was too late. Every day, the women would not only repost different versions of Morgan's missing person flyer to new communities, but they would also spend hours combing through the streets of Chicago, in locations where people said they may have seen the missing young woman. However, despite the efforts of everybody involved, Morgan would continue to remain missing, with the possible leads associated with her case beginning to dry up, as the community feared she may never be found. But just as hope was about to be lost, the Chicago police would finally get back in touch with Sam Farley, with an update which could have potentially changed everything. On Tuesday the 16th of April, Sam Farley would receive a phone call from the Chicago Police Department, who were announcing that they had finally decided to publish Morgan's missing person flyer on their website, explaining that the reason they had waited so long was because they hadn't received permission from the family to share the information publicly. But confused and frustrated by this revelation, Sam responded by saying that nobody tried to get in touch with him to ask for permission, and that he was under the impression that the police would have shared the flyer as soon as he reported her missing. As far as Sam was concerned, the minute he asked the police to help search for his daughter, this was all the permission they needed to start spreading the information. So he was frustrated to learn that 2 weeks of investigating had been wasted for such a ridiculous reason. However, now that he finally had the backing of the Chicago PD, Sam was at the very least relieved to know that more resources were about to be provided to the case, and therefore, the chances of his daughter being found had significantly heightened. But unfortunately, despite this increase in efforts to find Morgan Farley, it would seem that after countless searches and possible leads into her disappearance, she has still not been located to this day, leaving the local community severely perplexed as to what really happened to the missing young woman. Now, unfortunately, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now. But Morgan's family are continuing their efforts to find their missing loved one, as they hold on to the hope that she could still be out there. According to her sister Whitney, they don't know if she is safe or if she is possibly with someone who's putting her in danger. But either way, they will continue to follow every lead that comes in, as they are determined to find out the truth. However, given that Morgan has now been officially missing for over 5 weeks, alongside the incredibly concerning details surrounding her case, I can't help but feel that the likelihood of her safe return is only growing weaker as the days pass. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, as I normally do in these videos, I will begin this segment by discussing one of the more positive theories behind Morgan's disappearance, as I believe there is still every possibility that she could still be alive, potentially even waiting to be found. However, before I get into the details, a question I feel that needs to be answered is that if she is still alive, how come nobody has been able to find her for over 5 weeks? Well, a simple answer to this question could be that she doesn't want to be found. Her family did pose this as an option themselves, so perhaps it could be true, as it wouldn't be the first time that Morgan has distanced herself from her family as a result of her mental health issues. We know she was struggling with depression at the time of her disappearance, so perhaps she felt slightly suffocated at her father's house and wanted to get away to regain some independence. We know she used to live with an ex-partner, so maybe moving back into her family home at the age of 25 was just too difficult for her. However, if this was the case, why is it that after 5 weeks of searching, nobody has come forward to explain the situation, despite knowing just how desperate her family are to know she's okay? Well, you could argue that the lack of media attention around her case could be the reason for the lack of credible leads. After all, there haven't been many large news outlets covering the case, with only local journalists and non-profit organisations such as Capital B taking the time to cover the story and spread the word. So with the lack of widespread news reporting, it wouldn't surprise me if the reason behind nobody coming forward was because not enough has been done to share the details of the case. But taking a slightly darker approach, perhaps another angle you could look into would be to consider the possibility that the reason Morgan hasn't been found yet is because she is being kept hidden from the world. But if this was the case, and Morgan was kidnapped by somebody, who could have been responsible, and why? Well, based on the evidence that has been put forward by the family thus far, it would be very difficult to say for certain. But one theory that I think would be worth delving into would be the idea that she could be staying with an ex-boyfriend. Morgan's family did state in their interviews that she had suffered through multiple unhealthy relationships, which had destroyed her trust and had heightened her mental health struggles. But in the same vein, it is not uncommon for victims to go back to their abusers despite the mistreatment they may receive. So with this in mind, it could be possible that Morgan decided she didn't want to live with her father anymore, but with nowhere else to turn, she could have silently moved back in with an ex-boyfriend as a means of regaining her independence. Now I must say, there is no concrete proof of this being the case, and it is merely my own personal opinion based on the evidence. But given the fact that Morgan seemed to be in high spirits around the time she disappeared, you could argue that this could have been because she had a plan to escape, and was looking forward to carrying it out. However, there could also be another explanation for her sudden positive attitude, which for me is incredibly difficult to consider, but something I feel I have to mention, which is that Morgan could have made a much darker plan. Now, I don't want to delve too deep into this theory for obvious reasons, but a relatively common occurrence with people that are suffering from depression is that they can sometimes appear to be a lot happier, even convincing their family in the process that they have taken a sudden and dramatic positive turn in their mental health journey. But in reality, a lot of the time, these people have simply made their peace and are only happier because they have established an end date for their pain. So, given the fact that Morgan had been struggling with depression for a long time and had suffered through multiple episodes of mental crisis, it pains me to say that this could be a reason for why she has not been found. However, regardless of how or why she disappeared, one thing that is for certain is that we need to continue searching for answers, as her family deserve to know the truth. So with this in mind, please take the time to share Morgan's story and reach out to her family if you have any information that may help in the case. I will leave all contact information in the description below. Anyway, on that note, I think I'll leave this video here. But if you have any other theories of your own that you think may help explain what really happened to Morgan Farley, please leave your ideas in the comments down below and I'll do my best to get back to you. But until then, thank you so much for watching and make sure to subscribe to the channel for updates on these stories. Also, if you're from the Chicago area or you just found this story interesting, feel free to check out the video on screen now, which covers the case of Cheyenne Clues, who was another young woman from Chicago that mysteriously disappeared after spending time with her ex-boyfriend.